Stamps are so much more than just tiny perforated pieces of paper you stick on an envelope and pop in a postbox. They're beautiful, collectible, often valuable miniature masterpieces. I'm Damon Parkin. Welcome to my stamping ground. Stick around as we explore surprising stories behind Royal Mail stamps and collectibles. This is the Stampcast. This time we'll meet experts, authors and fans whose work you'll see in presentation packs, prestige stamp books and other collectibles. Now, if you already have the souvenirs from the Monty Python, Peanuts and Royal Observatory issues, pause me for a moment and dig them out, because this will be a rewarding interactive experience if they're in front of you as we explore their stories. And later, I'll be asking you to share your stories. What was your first day cover? I'll reveal mine and I want to hear about yours. First, join me on a journey through space and time. In June, Royal Mail marked the 350th anniversary of the home of modern British astronomy, with a first day cover and souvenirs celebrating the Royal Observatory, Greenwich. Talking through the collection is its senior curator, Dr. Louise Devoy. So we're here at what's been called the home of time, the birthplace of modern astronomy. What is so internationally significant about this place?
Yes, the Royal Observatory really has been crucial to measuring, defining and distributing time throughout the centuries. Originally, it was about producing star charts for other astronomers and to help navigators at sea as they plotted their position of the moon against the background stars. Very much about thinking about longitude, trying to work out where you are at sea, your east-west position. And then gradually over time, people realised that actually having time to coordinate the railways, businesses, finance, travel and trade, that's really important for the globe. And so that's why in 1884, a conference was held in Washington, DC. And after much debate, the delegates decided that the meridian, the north-south line used by the astronomers here, would be used to define 0 degrees longitude and the start of the universal day. So this place has just been so significant for everyone.
And we're celebrating the 350th anniversary of the Royal Observatory, Greenwich, with a set of Royal Mail stamps. Tell us about the involvement, the partnership with Royal Mail, how it came about, what was involved.
Yes, it was a very iterative, collaborative project, a lot of back and forth between us and Royal Mail, and it involved numerous teams, designers, the photography studio, image library, curators, astronomers. Everyone was really involved. It was really quite exciting. It was quite hard to sort of pin down our choices, and you really do have to sort of juggle around and try different things. So, for example, one of the biggest challenges is scale. As you can see, we've got this massive 8-metre long telescope. How do you show that on a tiny little stamp? So we had to sort of swap in and out different images. We also wanted to get a broad chronological spread across the whole 350-year history. Another consideration was colour. As you can imagine, a lot of the prints, engravings and photographs from the observatory's history are black and white, but we wanted to add in a bit of colour as well, so adding in extra pastels or background colours. We also had to think about text as well. How on earth do you explain these iconic objects in just 6 words? Now, I mean, as a museum curator, I'm used to writing labels of sort of 50 to 60 words, so I thought, yeah, this should be okay, but it was really hard trying to pin it down, so it was a good challenge.
And do you have a favourite object, a favourite stamp from the collection?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think in terms of the overall stamps, I really like the Shepherd Gate Clock one. The Shepherd Gate Clock, this is the dial that was installed outside the gates of the observatory in August 1852. Now visually, it's stunning, it's classic Victorian design. It's also a bit different. If you look closely, you'll notice that it has 24 hours instead of the usual 12. So you've got midnight at the top and midday at the bottom. So you have to sort of take a few seconds to read it. And the real version we keep on GMT, Greenwich Mean Time, all year round, because that was the main use here at the observatory. The daylight saving and British summertime didn't come in until 1916, quite late in the observatory's history. So that's why we keep it on GMT all year round. Sometimes a bit of confusion to our visitors. And then finally, as part of that stamp, we had to choose a contextual image. Now, the most obvious thing would be telegraph cables, because that particular gate dial was controlled by telegraph signals sent from another clock elsewhere, but it didn't quite work on that small scale on the stamp design. So we found this really charming picture from a book, Old and New London, from 1874. And it's an illustration that shows this very elegantly dressed young couple meandering up the hill, admiring the clock. But it's got a bit of Victorian artistic license in it, in that in reality you're sort of marching up the hill, you're sweaty, you're panting, you're red in the face. It's a bit more involved than that innocent scene.
Yes, we've done that a couple of times today. So you are our expert editorial contributor to this issue of Stamps and Collectibles, souvenirs including the medal cover and Prestige stamp book. How did you find the role in terms of the writing side of things? Was it an enjoyable process in terms of getting involved with that?
Yes, definitely. It was good to have the particular objects to focus on, and again, just to think, how can I convey their significance in a limited space, a few words, but it really sort of came together and sort of interwove quite nicely. So yeah, I really enjoyed it.
And we're celebrating John Harrison, that pioneering clockmaker, in the miniature sheet, and a special anniversary coming up for him. Tell us about his significance.
Yes, so next year will be 250 years since his death. And John Harrison really sits in the middle of a sort of 300-year period of developing accurate clocks for use at sea. Now, why do you need an accurate clock at sea? This all goes back to our idea about longitude, east-west position. If you imagine the Earth is rotating once every 24 hours, you can use time difference as a measure of your longitude difference. So having a clock that's reliable, that keeps going at sea, that's crucial. The most accurate clocks of Harrison's time were all pendulum based, but as you can imagine, trying to keep a pendulum clock running on a rocking ship, it's impossible. So he came up with various technological solutions, tried different prototypes, and eventually created what we now call H4, which is kind of a sort of oversized pocket watch that you'll see on the stamps. And this really proved that you could have an accurate clock at sea, and this sort of led to the development of what we call the chronometer. So it started off quite a simple idea, but had so much sort of thought processes and iteration behind it. It's a very human story of perseverance, dead ends, rethinking your ideas and starting again, but coming out well in the end and really transforming navigation.
And there's a lovely piece from you in the Prestige stamp book about women astronomers who perhaps have been underrepresented or maybe not celebrated enough. Just gives a flavour of some of the pieces in there around those really important figures.
Absolutely. So women have always played an important role in the observatory, but you're right, they've often been sort of hidden from history, either the wives or daughters of some of the astronomers royal, and that's been a real struggle to sort of unpick those stories. But the one that really comes to mind is the story of the lady computers. This was a group of 4 to 5 women who were employed in the 1890s specifically to work on this major new photographic survey. The idea was that the astronomers would photograph the sky and then assemble it all together to create one giant atlas. But it was very labour-intensive, time-demanding work, and they needed extra people to help. And unfortunately, women were cheap labour. So the women were employed, but they were all mathematics graduates, very well educated, and they really sort of carved out a niche for themselves while they were here for about 5 years or so. And in particular, one of them, Annie Scott Dill Russell, later married one of her colleagues, Walter Maunder, and she became a famous solar photographer. She travelled on eclipse expeditions, got some incredible shots. And so that's why we named one of our new telescopes after her, and you'll see that in the Annie Maunder astrographic telescope stamp as part of the set.
Now, I imagine you must be an advocate, a champion of women in these roles in this arena. I wonder if you could give us some encouragement maybe to girls or young women thinking of exploring a rewarding role in this area. Why should they explore astronomy as a career?
Definitely. I mean, I studied astrophysics myself, and it's opened up lots of avenues to me, ending up with my role here today. But I think overall it's open to anyone who's curious about the world and the universe. You can apply all sorts of techniques, whether it's computer science, mathematics, physics, chemistry. It involves incredible instruments from historic to modern. So it really opens up so many possibilities, and I'd advocate it for anyone.
And you've applied your curiosity to a new book. What if you could tell us about that?
Yes, this has been a real passion project for me for the last 5 years. I've been sort of rummaging into the stores and the archives, and I've picked out about 100 objects that I think really convey a sense of the work that was done here over the last 350 years. And it's everything from giant telescopes and clocks through to paintings, textiles, postcards, and a few quirky things as well, such as a little metal fork that was used for catching spiders. And then the idea was that you could use the silk threads to position in the eyepiece of the telescope and measure the stars as they cross. So really remarkable how sort of ingenious people were in making the most of what they had.
So that book has involved curation, maybe collecting ideas and objects. Are you a natural collector yourself? Stamps, perhaps?
Not myself, but I know people who are. So, for example, my husband is really into Victorian stamps. He loves all the detailed design work in the portraits. And my dad always used to collect first day covers as well. And I remember as a kid being excited when each issue used to come through the door. And you think, oh, is this month it's steam trains, next month it's flowers or whatever. It was always fascinating.
So, Louise, if you could design a set of special stamps, any topic, any theme, what would it be?
Gosh, that's a tricky one. I think for me personally, I'm really into ballroom dancing. So I think Foxtrot's my favourite dance. I would love to do a set of stamps that looks at waltz, tango, Viennese, Foxtrot and quickstep, and get some Latin dancers in there as well. But again, how do you convey that passion and that rhythm into a small stamp? That would be hard. Thanks to Louise. The Royal Observatory Greenwich 350th anniversary issue includes the 6 main stamps, the John Harrison miniature sheet, a 24-page prestige stamp book packed with Louise's historical insights, and limited edition coin covers released in partnership with the Royal Mint. They're all available at royalmail.com/Royal Observatory. Now, from 350 years of stargazing to 75 years of a comic strip classic, Charles Schulz's anxious underdog Charlie Brown, his beloved beagle Snoopy and their charming chums first appeared in 1950. July's stamp issue celebrated the enduring appeal of Peanuts. I caught up with comic strip connoisseur, writer and broadcaster Paul Gravett to talk through this colourful collection. Paul, why do you think that Royal Mail believes a 75-year-old American comic strip is a compelling subject for a set of special stamps? Why has Peanuts endured? What's its universal appeal?
Well, you're right to ask that. It's 1950 when Charles Schulz began the strip on a very small scale, but it quite rapidly became internationally successful. And even though we haven't had Schulz around making new comics now since 2000 when he passed away, a lot of them are still circulating, still around, and a new generation has come in, reading them online, a younger generation that has really taken them to heart and loving the characters. Snoopy is an icon that has kind of had a new lease of life. So it's never really faded away, and there are many reasons why it's successful, but I think fundamentally it's a comic with extraordinary heart and depth to it. And I read it when I was a young boy with my younger brother in the newspaper, in the Daily Mail, every day, and we clipped them out, and we did 6 of them into scrapbooks, but you know what happens, you always end up with piles of them that you haven't got around to doing. I didn't even know about the paperbacks at the time. But then, of course, as an adult, you can also love them. And these stories kind of keep on working and speaking to our lives and our emotions today.
I had the paperback books as a child, still have them, and I still dip into them. Because it is intergenerational, they're very gentle, but there's something philosophical, even profound about them.
Absolutely. This is the surprise, I think, that Schulz was quite a thoughtful and certainly quite Christian, religious person, and he didn't just go for the simple laughs and the gags and the punchline you'd expect. I can remember reading them as a child, that what we loved about it was not just that you get a gag every day, but often there'd be like a theme running through at least a week or so, and you start to see how he'd build up a situation. And with many characters, of course, he could sort of surprise you and bring them to life on the page very, very well.
What's the origin story? What was Schulz's original idea? When was it first launched? When did it move over to the UK?
Yeah. I mean, Schulz came up with the seed of the whole Peanuts thing was actually doing single panel cartoons called Lil Folks, and which in fact even has some of the cast members, even a Snoopy on all 4 legs pops up in this. This is when he was a budding cartoonist. He was talented at that. And he proposed that to a syndicate, and they saw the potential. He never liked the title that they gave it. Peanuts was something he as a title was not his choice. He would have preferred, I think, Little Folks or something along those lines, or even Charlie Brown, in fact. But there were reasons why that didn't work. And the strip began in around October 1950, and it had very few clients, honestly, when it started. As you might expect, people, brand new cartoonists, brand new strip. It took a while to catch on, but within a short time, it spread internationally. In the UK, we were quite slow, actually, which is kind of, I've been wondering why. Part of it is that we did have a lot of strips already in our newspapers. We had a lot of, locally made, UK-produced stuff. And it took until 1953, so that's quite a gap, 3 years. Yeah. By that point, the strip, of course, was quite advanced, so they couldn't really go right back to the beginning. They dropped in with, sort of, as you say, almost kind of part the way through, but dropped in the characters. Unusually, I was looking at the very paper. It was the Daily Sketch where it appeared. It doesn't exist anymore. But and there was no hoo-ha about it. No mention. No, like, here's a profile of Charles Schulz or Starting Today or anything. It just pops up on the very back page at the bottom, just like a little PS at the end of it. And but from there, of course, it became more and more popular.
And can you describe his style? It's almost minimalist, almost naive illustration.
He was quite revolutionary in that way because even amongst the humour comic artists at the time, the drawing was usually quite finished and detailed. But he'd come from a gag cartooning tradition, which is usually uses a simpler style. Certainly by this point of the post-war era, that had caught on. And I think he really realized how powerful this simple line could be, because Schulz's lines are not simple. You can get somebody else to try and draw them, but he knows every little quiver and every little nuance of the line is expressive. The characters seem to be three-dimensional, even though they are two-dimensional in terms of the drawing.
What is remarkable is beyond comic strip, it's culture. It's still a big brand. I have a Charlie Brown t-shirt. There was a new Charlie Brown animation launched in September. Product, merchandise. It's a massive brand beyond just this comic strip launched 75 years ago.
I agree. And I think in many ways it's perhaps even more familiar now. That it's spread so internationally through the internet. That has opened up even markets perhaps that weren't seeing the strip that much. But it did get syndicated in so many countries, in so many languages. And Peanuts, of course, is particularly famous because of Snoopy and the character that has became sort of transcended the strip in a way. He was the coolest thing you could be wearing in the 60s and 70s, for example. And I always loved when Woodstock appeared because that gave Snoopy the crucial thing of having a character that he could interact with, even though we never really understand exactly what Woodstock was chirping. Kind of knew. We could work it out.
And do you have any favourite characters within my group?
Gosh, it's very hard to choose one. And luckily we don't have to choose because we have all of them to enjoy. But I'm reflecting that in a way it varies from moment to moment and from person to person, of course. But I'm thinking that actually it's Lucy. Mm-hmm. It's actually perhaps the most surprising character because we generally don't get disagreeable, complicated, curmudgeonly fuss budgets like her in comics. I mean, now you have perhaps many more of them, but back then, she's obviously a great vehicle for humour because of her many criticisms and her awful attitudes towards characters. But there's also the poignancy of her never really being able to get through to Schroeder, the blonde boy pianist who is just completely in love with Beethoven and nothing else, or doesn't seem to notice her at all. I think most of us, one way or the other, probably had at least some unrequited loves like that. In the same way, of course, that Schulz did himself. This theme of longing and a disappointment and regrets, and realising that maybe life isn't actually wonderful, not the kind of thing you'd expect to get necessarily from a supposed strip about children, was deeply rooted in his own life. He had had an unrequited romance with a woman when he was younger, and that city haunted him through the comic strip. And that I think would be my choice. But the good thing is we don't have to choose because they've reprinted all of them. I think almost all of them are also online if you want to do that.
I always ask my guests, are you a collector? I'm not necessarily talking about stamps, but I'm guessing perhaps you must be a collector, a curator.
Yeah, I think perhaps curator is a better word. In fact, I'm curating 2 exhibitions at the moment, which is brain melting. But one will be on LGBT comics next year, but I can't say more about that. And the other one I can't say much about is going to be about Tove Jansson, who was the creator of the Moomins, who celebrated 80 years this year, so another anniversary year. But I tell myself it's an archive, but it's not really a collection because I'm not a completist. Collectors tend to want everything. And actually, there was a lovely lady who got in touch with me and asked me to sign a set of the package, the special presentation things, because she had an extraordinarily huge collection, particularly of Snoopy, cabinets and cabinets. I thought, well, that's the complete dedication, and wonderful to be asked that. But I have so much interest in comics, and there's so much to learn, and I can never get to the end of a collection. That's the nice thing. If you have a collection, you may find that you can't collect anymore. You've got everything. What do you do now? So the way I'm feeling myself is I will never stop. Curating and understanding comics on a global scale. Yeah.
And how was your experience working with Royal Mail? Was it a positive one?
Very much so. I mean, it's probably, I don't think it's a secret, but I had a little bit of interaction previously on previous comics-related sets that was unofficial, and I wasn't prevented, no problem at all. It was great fun to do that. And it was lovely. I have actually got ideas for a stamp set, which they ought to do. I mean, we'll do it.
Well,
maybe in my lifetime.
Always my final question to every guest is if you could choose a special stamp set, any theme, what would it be?
Well, what I would most like to see, and it's been done by other countries, Canada did a wonderful one, would be one celebrating contemporary, mostly as contemporary or recent authors of graphic novels. Because they were people like Raymond Briggs and Posey Simmons, and also writers like Alan Moore and others, and even people like Alice Oseman, for example. And what was nice of the Canadian set they didn't show the creator, it showed the characters reading the book that they made. And it was a really elegant set of stamps. I think Canada's talking about doing another set. But that would be a lovely thing to do. And then at the same time, there was a project developed that didn't happen at the time, to do something with the National Portrait Gallery at the same time, because they've got amazing portraits of comic creators. I mean, not just necessarily living ones, but historically. It would be lovely to have a show.
You'll find all 8 stamps, a presentation pack, limited edition metal covers, framed artwork and more at royalmail.com/peanuts. Now for something completely different. August Stamps and Collectibles capture the surreal humour and anarchic creativity of Monty Python's Flying Circus and the 1975 cult comedy film Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I explored Monty Python's inventive animation, surreal humour and impact on generations of comedy creators and fans with journalist and author Tom Huddleston. Tom, when did you first encounter Monty Python?
Well, I think they repeated all 4 series of Monty Python's Flying Circus on the BBC when I would have been about 12 or 13, and I would have taped them all and watched them again and again and again. Graham Chapman's funeral, John Cleese controversially cursing at the pulpit, which is kind of a classic clip. I remember that quite clearly from that age, and I must have seen Holy Grail and Life of Brian around the same time as well. I mean, I may have seen some of it earlier. I certainly remember Mr. Creosote being talked about in the playground when I was, 8, 9, 10. So yeah, but my first clear memory is definitely seeing those Flying Circus episodes being repeated on BBC Two.
But as a young teenager, what drew you to Monty Python then? Because it can be quite complex, subversive, quite obscure for a young teenager. What attracted you to that humour?
Well, I'd been raised on that kind of humour. Me and my mum would listen to The Goon Show and Round the Horn when they were repeated on Radio 4. So we'd actually time our dinner together at 6:30 so that we could listen to something like The Goon Show or Round the Horn. And then I had the tapes of those series, and we used to listen to them on long journeys and stuff. So that kind of wacky humour wasn't all that unusual to me as a kid. And then Monty Python just slotted right into that. And I must have got Monty Python Sings, the album, the LP around the same time, so I knew all the songs. So I was soaking up Monty Python. I remember when I was at school, I must have been probably 14. We were asked to choose a hero to give a speech to the rest of the class about, and I chose Michael Palin. So I did sort of a 10-minute speech on the life and career of Michael Palin to my class as my kind of hero at the time.
There is a direct line from The Goon Show through to Monty Python, I think. And Spike Milligan, of course, Q came out about 6 months before Monty Python's Flying Circus. So there was that subversive, obscure, surreal humour had been established. What was so special about Monty Python? Why was it so surprising when it arrived on our screens?
I don't know. I think there's a sweetness to Monty Python that maybe there isn't in Q. Q can be quite. Its surrealism is a bit harder edged, as opposed to the Goon Show, which is very kind of funny and quite cosy and tea timey. Q's quite, or what I've seen of it, I don't know if all of it survives, but what I've seen of it is quite tough. And the David Frost stuff was more kind of political and newsy. And Monty Python is there's bits of violence and there's bits of kind of saucy stuff, but there's a lot of it is just very goofy and absurd and sweet. And I think that people, it's very non-threatening in the best way. I certainly don't use that as a criticism. It's very enjoyable to watch and lovely to watch. And you can, a lot of the people who were watching it were in bands, they were students, they were probably a little, slightly enhanced in some way. So probably watching something that was just goofy and daft was probably just what they wanted right then.
And you talk about the goofiness and the daftness, but actually it was like a combination of intellect and immaturity, wasn't it? Because you had the philosopher's football with Confucius, I think, as the referee. So really kind of complex stuff, but playing out in a lot of slapstick ways.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the Monty Python team would admit that even when they touched on quite highfalutin themes, they didn't really dig into them. When you none of the philosophers espouse their philosophies, they just run up and down the football pitch. And when they do summarised Proust, it's not like they actually go into Proust in any detail. It's just using those kind of names as intellectual markers and goofing on things that people like them, fellow kind of students and intellectuals would find funny.
So they go their separate ways. Cleese leaves earlier, obviously, but they come back after the first film. So Monty Python and the Holy Grail, I think, is the first real film. Mm-hmm. So what's the story behind it? Do you know why they decided to get back together? And I guess the story of the Holy Grail, which is the miniature sheet stamps for this issue.
Yeah, so I mean, they as I'm sure you know, they'd made a film called "And Now for Something Completely Different," which was a compilation of sketches reshot on film, mainly for an American market. It didn't do super well because it felt a bit stiff and a bit forced. It was them revisiting old material. There was no laugh track. It just doesn't quite work. So this was them actually making their own movie on their own terms, and they decided that they were going to direct it themselves, which they'd never directed a movie before. I think they directed bits of And Now for Something Completely Different, but they certainly never directed a whole film. And the idea first came from Terry Jones, who was really into his medieval stuff and his Arthurian history and Arthurian myth. So I think the initial idea was actually to make a film set both in the past and the present. Right. So it would have been King Arthur coming to our time. They apparently wrote a sketch of King Arthur lost in Harrods. But eventually they just decided to, just retell the story of Arthur with as many gags as humanly possible. So Terry Jones and Terry Gilliam directed together, and the kind of idea was that Jones would focus on the people and Gilliam would focus on the technical side, essentially, was the sort of the idea. It didn't completely work. They didn't totally know what they were doing. The weather was miserable. Graham Chapman was suffering from quite severe personal problems and alcoholism. They were just in a situation, the money was extraordinarily tight. I mean, everyone looks at the film now and goes, how clever it is that they use coconuts banging together instead of horses and how funny that is. But the truth is they couldn't afford horses. They didn't have the budget to afford horses. The other famous thing about the film, obviously, is that a large chunk of the money came from musicians. So they basically hit up Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, various other kind of groups who were having a big success at the time. Their managers went, yeah, okay, that sounds like a really good idea. So yeah, and then they must have made their money back many times over, because the film was an enormous success. So yeah, the shoot was very, very difficult. It was very wet. The suits of armour were made out of wool, so they got incredibly wet and soggy, and everyone was miserable. And then when they got the film back into the editing suite, none of it worked. They hated it, they cut it, they recut it. I think they did like 14 different edits and hated it. And Neil Innes, who was a long-time Python collaborator, he was in the Bonzo Dog Doodah band, but he also wrote a lot of music with the Pythons. He wrote like a medieval type score for it, which you can occasionally hear little bits of coming in and out. And it just didn't work. The film wasn't funny with that music on it. And so eventually they ended up using essentially library music, so that sort of music that had been written for BBC drama shows, that was very pompous and epic and over the top, and they just cut that in and it made it 10 times funnier. And from there they kind of recut, and it just started to get funnier and funnier and funnier. And even at the end, like John Cleese, for the rest of, probably still says that he hates the ending. You know, that it ends just with a hard cut at the end. So yeah, you know, I think even then they weren't happy with it. But once it got out into the world, people just absolutely adored it.
And it shows that Monty Python were, in a way, comedy rock stars, because you talk about the bands that got involved and helped finance it. You think about George Harrison with Handmade Films. Neil Innes worked, of course, with Eric Idle on The Ruttles, which I think is a great kind of film by a Python. 50 years on then from its first release, why are we still quoting it, Tom? What is it about that film?
I think it's two reasons. One, it's spectacularly funny. The jokes just really work. They're literally timeless, because it's, you know, it's set in the medieval period, and there's no, you know, obviously it's silly and ridiculous, but none of the jokes are of their time. You know, there are no references to whoever was in, you know, power at the time. There's references to kind of hippie communes and things like that, which maybe have slightly dated, but are still very, very funny. But overall, none of the jokes have dated, and it's still super funny. And the other reason why I personally go back to it and love to see it, I watched it on the big screen at the BFI South Bank a few years ago, is just how beautiful it is. Mm-hmm. It really is, like, you know, it's comparable to John Borman's Excalibur, which was made, 10 years later. You know, it has that kind of English fog and you know, light coming through the mist and these beautiful landscapes, and it just I think it's the best looking comedy film ever made.
We're talking because you're one of the expert editorial contributors to Royal Mail Stamps and Collectibles, and for the Monty Python collection, you've written the presentation pack. I wonder how you approach these projects.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm approached by Royal Mail and asked if I'd like to work on a project, to which I almost invariably say yes, because they're always really good fun. And yeah, so yes, I'm always given a brief, and you know, this'll sit on this page and this'll sit on that page, but I can also suggest my own ideas. Certainly have done that in the past. And yeah, so. There is certainly, you know, you're always aware that the rights holders of any property are going to be reading it. So, you know, it's not a work of criticism; it's a work of celebration. Yeah. And that's certainly how I kind of go into it. It helps that I'm always writing about something that I really like, so I'm really happy to, you know, celebrate it in any way that I can. That, you know, the one time I got feedback was working on the Blackadder stamps, and we got feedback that Richard Curtis really liked the copy and really liked my writing. So, and that was a really, really lovely thing to hear. So, and you know, if they don't like it, we rewrite it. Yeah. So, which is fine too.
But is it an exercise in stretching your tone of voice as well? Because writing, for instance, Sherlock or Warhammer or Star Wars, which you've worked on the stamp collections for those, and writing Monty Python, different tones of voice, perhaps different audiences, so it keeps you fresh in terms of understanding your audience and also the tone and personality of the characters you're writing about.
Yeah, I mean, doing a job like working at Time Out on the film desk, which I did for a long time, you get used to addressing yourself to different readers and different audiences. So I would write everything from quite serious interviews with very serious, art house filmmakers to daft list pieces on, the best movies with hats and the best, instances in a film where someone's head explodes, or, the silliest dogs in movies, or, so there'd be a huge spread of tones of voice and readerships targeted. So I guess it comes back to that. So yes, with Star Wars, you're sort of enthusiastic and nerdy, and with Sherlock, that was slightly more serious, maybe in tone. And then for Blackadder and Monty Python, it was trying to, without coming off as attempting to outshine the material that you already have, but to throw a couple, to write in quite a light-hearted way. So, I mean, one of the pieces that I wrote for the Monty Python starts off with, on such and such a date, I think it's July 20th, whenever it was, 1969, man first landed on the moon. 2 weeks later, something even more extraordinary happened. So it's about putting in a joke that isn't, it's not going to blow anyone's minds as a joke, but just something that's quite readable and will make you smile a little bit and know that you're kind of going into something quite light and funny. Yeah.
Going from talking about tone of voice and different audiences, going from the ridiculous to sublime with your beautiful new book launched last week about David Lynch's work and world. I wonder, is there a connection there? Are there parallels between Monty Python, who really pioneered a new type of comedy, and Lynch, who really kind of established a new genre for TV, what we'd call prestige TV, I think. So in a way, they're both pioneers, even in totally different realms. Yeah,
absolutely. I think, they were both people who, for whatever reason, were completely unafraid to do something that hadn't been done before, and went at it full bore and full throttle, whether or not there was a risk of driving straight into a wall. I also think that, I don't know if Lynch was a Python fan, but it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. There is absurdist humour in everything that he ever did, from Eraserhead onwards. Having grown up on Python probably opened my mind to the surrealism of Lynch. I was probably better prepared for that sort of thing as quite a young kid because I'd watched Monty Python.
They both live in that small space between subversive, obscure, absurd, and mainstream.
Yeah,
kind of.
Yeah,
and that's a really
absolutely. Yeah. It really is. Yeah, and they do absolutely. They both balance themselves quite perfectly on that point. Yeah.
So your beautiful book on David Lynch. You've worked with Lucasfilm. You've written Star Wars books, Warhammer books, children's fiction. A lot of stuff out there in the world. What still draws you back into the world of stamps and Royal Mail?
Well, I mean, on one level, it's just really good fun. It's really good fun to write copy about stuff that I enjoy. They always, getting paid to write about Star Wars and Star Trek and Blackadder and Sherlock and all of these things that I adore. Porridge, that was a really, really good fun one. Getting to, it's a series that I absolutely adore, and couldn't, in what other context would I get the opportunity to write about Porridge? I'm not going to sit down and write a whole book about it. So, it was really good fun. But also, I'm a collector of things. I'm a collector of records. I'm a collector of books. And when I was a kid, I had my stamp collecting time. My dad lived in the Seychelles for a long time. He taught maths over there, and I used to go out twice a year and visit him with my sister. And the stamps they had over there were beautiful. A lot of them had kind of wildlife and birds on, which at the age of, what would I have been, 8, 9, 10, 11, that was what I was really into. So they'd have, beautiful stamps with giant tortoises and, various seabirds and all this kind of stuff. So I collected those, and, so I completely understand the passion, for sure. Yeah. I feel really comfortable writing for Royal Mail. It's always something that I want to do and that I enjoy doing. So I always really look forward to those emails, for sure.
Tom, you've worked on a variety of themes for Royal Mail, from Star Wars to Aardman animation. Is there a theme, a subject you'd like to tackle for Royal Mail that you'd like to see on a set of stamps?
Well, I know that they do music stamps. I loved the David Bowie ones. I would have loved to have worked on those. I would love to see, I think it's probably too obscure. I would love to see a set of kind of post-punk stamps. How about that? I would work on those. How about, The Cure on a stamp? I'd like to see that. I'd like to see Gang of Four on a stamp. I'd like to see Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark on a stamp. Yeah. I think that would be really good fun. Let's have, let's have weird early 80s indie post-punk
XTC
stamp.
Teardrop Explode.
Yeah. Let's have that stamp set. I'd certainly like to work on that. That'd be fun.
And thanks to Tom for putting up with my Spanish Inquisition. Alongside the stamps, miniature sheet and presentation pack, you'll find limited edition medal covers and a stunning gold miniature sheet. It's all at royalmail.com/Monty Python. Finally, from a group of funny men to a bunch of fungi, April's first day cover and collectibles unearth the magical world of mushrooms. 10 special stamps feature striking photography of some extraordinary species found across the UK woodlands, fields and gardens. From edible and tasty to toxic and even deadly, the mushrooms collection includes stamps celebrating 10 of our nation's 4,000 varieties. Have a forage through our fungi-focused issue at shop.royalmail.com. And don't forget, you'll never miss a first day cover or any other collectibles with a Royal Mail Stamps subscription. For free delivery on the first day of issue, just visit royalmail.com/subscriptions. Out now is an issue showcasing the vibrant and varied species of ducks that grace our nation's rivers, estuaries and coastlines. In September, we honoured UK rail trailblazers on the 200th anniversary of the Stockton and Darlington Railway. And October's issue celebrates Monopoly, the iconic board game that's been at the heart of family fun and friendly feuds for 90 years. And that's what I love about first day cover stamps. Ducks, trains, games, such a rich, diverse range of subjects and souvenirs. As we head into the festive season, look out for the much anticipated Christmas stamps and the publication of the stunning 2025 Stamp Yearbook. Now, before we go, we want to hear from you. What do you want to know about? Who do you want to hear from on the Stampcast? Like, share, subscribe, comment, get involved. And I want to know about your first day cover. When was it? What was it? Mine was from the 11th of July 1979, celebrating the year of the child, with 9, 10.5, 11 and 13 pence stamps with illustrations of childhood favourites such as Winnie the Pooh, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, The Wind in the Willows and Peter Rabbit. It's a first day cover I've treasured for the last 50 years. Share your first day cover story in the comments, and we'll share our favourites next time on the Stampcast.